If you can answer my question correctly, I'll do anything you say. I attended my high school reunion.
Rachel, a beautiful classmate from Harvard who always had a sarcastic remark for me, suddenly hit me with a tough question. It was the kind of question that could only be solved with knowledge of French. She looked at me with a slight smirk, clearly expecting me, just a high school graduate, to fail.
But I just answered, I got it already.
Then, leaving her stunned by my correct answer, I walked away from the venue.
A few days later, she came to my office. On a circle with radius alpha, the central angle beta along the central line. Standing near the door on the morning commute train.
I reviewed the material for next week's exams as the train slowed and approached the nearest station to my high school.
Wow, it's a long line today too.
After passing through the ticket gate and looking over toward the bus stop, I saw the usual sight, a long line of students in uniform.
Hey, Alex. Oh, hey, good morning. The one who called out was Ryan, my classmate.
Since we took the same train, we always ended up waiting at the bus stop together.
Hey, Alex, I need help with a math question during break. Is that cool? Yeah, sure. My name is Alex Carter, a second-year high school student with exams coming up next week. So if you set this part as EOB equals alpha, then AB becomes 2 alpha sin alpha. It's easier to see if you bisect AB perpendicularly. Oh, I get it now. Thanks.
I go to a private high school that's far from home. My dad, who runs a food factory, encouraged me by saying, "Don't worry about tuition, I'll handle the scholarship repayment later." He wanted me to go to this challenging private school, even though it was expensive.
Alex, could you help me with this English grammar question? Oh, this part, yeah. I'm also stuck on this translation. Could you explain it to me? Sure, I got it. My classmates often came to me for help, trying to clear up any misunderstandings before exams. Oomph, always playing the helpful guy.
Turning around, I saw Rachel watching me with a puzzled look from her seat near the hall. She was the daughter of a company president, a beautiful girl with striking features. She was also exceptionally bright, ranking at the top of our grade among the girls. You're lowering your own rank by being such a helper.
One exam period.
I remembered dropping in rank, and she made sure to point that out.
Well, I'm not as brilliant as you, Rachel.
I believe her intelligence isn't something she was simply born with, it's the result of her hard work. I'd seen her studying alone in classrooms in the library after school and on weekends, out of sight of others.
We were in the same class for both junior and senior years.
She always tried to compete with me during exams, so I often just let her comments go, finding it a bit of a hassle. But when I became a senior, my father's factory started facing serious financial trouble.
We might have to let go of the business. My father ran a small food processing plant. But the economic downturn had started to impact his company. Dad, I'll come work at the factory.
Understanding the situation, I decided to give up on college and help my dad. Though he wanted me to go to college, he couldn't oppose it under these circumstances. With a pained expression, he apologized, saying, "I'm sorry." But I knew that everything I'd been able to achieve so far was because he'd worked so hard to support my education.
Dad, what are you talking about?
Thank you for letting me study freely all this time.
Now it's my turn to pay it back.
It's just that I'm starting to pay Dad back a little sooner than planned. When I said that, my dad shed a tear and said, "Thank you."
What? Alex, you're not going to college? Yeah, I just want to get out there and become independent sooner. Oh, well, that's just like you.
Go for it. I'll be rooting for you from behind the scenes.
Thanks. I hadn't told my classmates about my family's situation. I didn't think there was any need to say anything about it.
I wasn't looking for sympathy, nor did I want to tarnish my dad's honor. Despite that, my classmates encouraged me.
All except for one. Alex, I heard. You're planning to get a job?
One day, as I was walking down the hall, Rachel called out to me.
What, are you planning to start a business or something? No, I just thought I'd start working and get out into the world sooner.
When I replied, Rachel looked at me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Giving up on college for a reason like that is ridiculous.
That's something someone who hasn't thought about their future would do. Are you serious? Yeah, I'm serious. Unbelievable. I didn't think you were this shallow. Turns out you're just another failure.
With those words, she walked briskly down the hall. And so, time passed until our high school graduation. The words our homeroom teacher, Mr. Thompson, left us with on our last day have stayed with me ever since.
Today marks the end of your high school years.
You'll face many things from here on, but I want each of you to find happiness in your future.
What is needed to be truly happy? I hope you'll find the answer as you grow. Listening to Mr. Thompson's final message, we all stood in solemn silence. For years after graduation, my father had an accident on the premises, leaving him unable to walk well, and I took over running the factory. Mr. Carter, what are you looking at? HM?
Oh, it's an invitation to my high school reunion. Said my office assistant, peeking over at the invitation.
Whoa, it's at a fancy hotel. And wow, it costs $200. Mr. Carter, can you afford that? When she asked me, sounding a bit mischievous, I answered with a laugh. No big deal.
When I said I could handle it, she whispered with a small grin. If you need, I could lend you some money, with interest, of course.
Oh, come on, I've got enough for this. Now get back to work. All right.
But remember, I'm here if you're ever short on cash, she chuckled.
My staff often tease me about always being low on cash.
As long as I can pay everyone a good wage, though, that's all that matters to me. Thinking this, I pulled out my wallet and started counting the bills inside. A few days later, the reunion day arrived.
I arrived a bit late to the venue, having dealt with a problem at the factory. Apparently, since many classmates were graduating from four-year universities and entering the workforce, they decided to hold a reunion before everyone started their new jobs. Alex, you're late.
Sorry, I had to take care of a problem.
It took a little longer than expected.
Though several years had passed since high school, my old friends warmly welcomed me, and we caught up on each other's lives.
So, Alex, I heard you took over the family business. How's that going?
Well, I wouldn't say it's great, but we're managing. All my classmates had graduated from prestigious private or national universities. They had secured positions at top-tier companies like general trading firms, major banks, and securities firms. I was the only one among them who had started working right out of high school. It was true that I wanted to see my old friends at this reunion, but I felt out of place whenever the conversation turned to work.
But you know, Alex, I was surprised when I heard you were going straight into a job. You had the grades to aim for a national university, what a waste. You're giving me too much credit. I'm really not that exceptional. That's right, you are giving him way too much credit. Just because someone's good at studying doesn't make them exceptional. When I turned around to the voice behind us, Rachel was standing there.
She wore a dress with a bold neckline that instantly drew everyone's eyes. The youthful look she had in high school was gone. She had become a stunningly elegant woman.
Oh, here comes the Harvard pageant winner. She definitely has a different aura than the other girls.
Humph, I see. People from lower classes can only make such shallow comments. I'd heard rumors Rachel had gotten into Harvard on her first try and even won Miss Harvard that year, beating upperclassmen. And now, she was working as a secretary for the CEO of her father's company.
Well, I have to say, you look pretty worn out.
You could have dressed more appropriately for the occasion. This is a hotel, after all.
Oh, you're right, but I don't own a suit. I don't usually go to places like this.
Most of the men here were dressed in expensive-looking jackets or suits. I was probably the only one in a worn, casual shirt. Her remark about my attire only made me feel more out of place. Look, people can tell your lifestyle by how you dress, so in places like this, you need to dress properly.
You make me look bad by association. Could you stop doing that?
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Rachel had always been sharp-tongued in high school, but as a professional, she'd taken that edge to a whole new level.
Hey, Rachel, you don't have to go that far. Alex's family business is going through a tough time. If he can't even manage a small factory, maybe he just doesn't have what it takes to be a business owner.
It was true, the factory was struggling. Maybe she was right. Maybe I just wasn't cut out to be a manager.
Do you remember what Mr. Thompson said on graduation day? About what it takes to be happy?
Oh yeah, he told us to find the answer ourselves.
Ha, unlike you, sweating it out every day, I've already found my answer.
Rachel held a wine glass, her confidence practically radiating. A top degree in this country, constant attention, and one day marrying the heir to a wealthy family, living comfortably without a care.
That's what happiness is. Could you ever live like that?
She looked down at me as she spoke.
It was true, I didn't have a prestigious education or much money. I was just a guy working hard every day alongside my team.
But seeing the dedication of my colleagues working toward a shared goal, hearing positive feedback from customers about our products,
and knowing that I was growing as a person, supported by those around me.
All these small things, they were what made me happiest.
Come on, it's a reunion, let's not get into it. Let's just enjoy ourselves.
One of our friends, sensing the tension, took me aside to another counter, pulling us apart.
But Alex, you're the president now, right? That's impressive. My company's big, but I'm still just a low-level employee. Who knows when I'll move up? You'll be fine, Ryan. You're the best I know at rallying people. Before long, that talent will get you to the top.
While I was talking with my friend, I heard some kind of lively exchange a little way off.
What? I have no idea. Can anyone solve this?
Oh, please, it's a simple problem for someone from Harvard.
Should I make it a bit easier?
Apparently, Rachel was hosting a game, challenging people with questions, and everyone around her was trying to answer. The evening went on, drinks were flowing, and the game grew even livelier.
Hey, you over there, Mr. High School grad. Why don't you join in?
Ha!
Oh, but of course, you probably can't even understand the question, right?
Her mocking tone directed at me made even the people around us uncomfortable.
Losers should just stick to gatherings of other losers. This is a group for winners. Her words brought an instant silence to the room.
But Rachel didn't seem to notice and casually muttered something in a foreign language. Then, with a sneer, she looked back at me.
Oh, that's right. I forgot a high school grad like you wouldn't understand what I'm saying. My apologies. Even I couldn't let her mocking attitude slide, so I walked over to Rachel to say my piece. Rachel, are you asking people these trivial questions just to show off how smart you are? Not at all. I can't help it if I was born with this talent, can I? I'm not like you, so don't be bitter about it. Oh, here's an idea. If you can answer my question correctly, I'll do anything you want. You can ask for anything. So, how about it? Want to give it a try? She laughed sarcastically, taking a sip of her wine while looking at me. I responded without hesitation. Rachel. What? You went to cram school, had private tutors, wore branded clothes to catch people's attention, got into a company through connections, and will likely marry at your parents' urging. What value does a life dependent on others have? Ha! Ha, you're one to talk. You've only ever lived for others. Sacrificing your time to tutor classmates, dropping in rank because of it. Then, you took over your family's company for the employees' sake, struggling financially because of it. You've never lived for yourself. Tell me, what's the point of a life like that? As everyone around us froze in silence, Rachel and I stared each other down. But as fierce as her gaze was, I noticed a hint of sadness in her eyes. After a moment, I turned on my heel and headed for the exit. Alex, you're leaving already? Yeah, sorry. I let my friend know I was heading out and walked toward the door. Pausing, I turned back to Rachel. The words you used earlier, they come from a French proverb that describes a conversation falling into silence. With that, I left the venue. At the nearest station, I boarded the bus, holding onto the handrail by the driver's seat. All you've ever done is live for others. Her words echoed in my mind. Living for others, huh? Her comment lingered with me as I rode the late-night bus home, feeling a mix of emotions. 3 days after the reunion, Mr. Kensington, the president of Kensington Industries, with whom we were collaborating on a new product, visited my company. Thank you for taking the time to visit us today. As I greeted Mr. Kensington, I noticed Rachel standing behind him for some reason. She seemed just as surprised to realize I was the business partner she'd be dealing with. Shall we get down to business, Mr. Carter? Oh, yes, please. Mr. Kensington led the discussion on product development. And after about 2 hours, we moved to small talk. I brought my daughter today to give her some work experience. She can't do anything without my help, honestly. She's a real handful. As Mr. Kensington laughed dismissively, Rachel stared at the floor, silent. She hadn't said a word since she arrived at my company. My son will be taking over, so I plan to have her marry into a related company's family someday. Until then, I figured she could gain a bit of experience at our firm. I see. I nodded, glancing at Rachel, who was looking down, saying nothing. With our meeting finished, Mr. Kensington and Rachel climbed into a sleek, black luxury car. Well, we look forward to working together. Yes, thank you. We appreciate your partnership. The driver closed the door with a solid thud, and they drove away with a quiet hum. To think Rachel was with Kensington Industries, but she didn't say a single word while sitting beside him. I couldn't help but feel a bit of sympathy for her, as Mr. Kensington continued belittling her. A few days later, while I was working in the factory, an assistant called out to me. Mr. Carter, there's someone here from Kensington Industries. All right, show them to the reception room. I paused my work, wiped the sweat from my brow with the towel around my neck,
and headed to the reception room.
Thank you for waiting. To my surprise, Rachel was the one standing there. Wait, you're the employee from Kensington Industries, Rachel?
She looked me up and down, as if assessing my worth.
Even though you're the president, do you always dress like that at work? Rachel asked, half exasperated, seemingly unimpressed by my not-so-presidential attire. Yeah. Even as president, I'm usually out there working with the team, so I wear work clothes. After all, it's a small factory. I answered her with a laugh, but she still looked a bit doubtful. I brought the documents from Mr. Kensington. Here. Thanks. I'll look over them tonight.
Please let Mr. Kensington know I'll need 3 or 4 days.
Got it. Well then. With that, Rachel quickly stood up to leave. Rachel, if you have a moment, want to talk?
I stopped her before she could go, and we headed to a nearby park. At midday, the park was mostly empty, except for a group of preschool kids playing with their teachers.
We sat down on a bench. Hey, sorry about the other night at the reunion. I might have gone too far. I apologized for getting carried away back then. Don't worry about it. Adults don't get angry when kids call them names, right? It's the same thing. No matter what a loser like you says. It doesn't affect me. Oh. I see.
After that, I found myself unsure of what to say, and we fell silent.
I caught a glimpse of you in the factory earlier.
You seem close to your employees.
Shouldn't you be more commanding as the boss?
Apparently, before she went to reception, she'd seen me working cheerfully alongside my employees.
It's a small place, so we're close. Working together lets me get to know everyone's personality and way of thinking. And as president, I can't do this job alone. It's thanks to everyone's support that the factory operates, so I help out too. You're always putting others first. Alex, you haven't changed a bit.
Rachel crossed her legs, leaning back with a sigh. Rachel, Mr. Kensington clearly cares about you, though.
He keeps you close to give you experience and teach you.
It's nice to have a parent who's that invested in your future. At my words, Rachel looked down, speaking softly.
He doesn't care about me at all.
Then, in a quiet voice, she began to speak.
It's always been about my brother. I'm just an afterthought. No way. Since high school, you've had a great life and been well taken care of.
But she cut me off, her voice firm.
No. Not at all.
Her outburst startled the kids in the distance, and they all turned to look.
I was never important. I was sent to cram school because I couldn't keep up with my brother.
When that didn't work, they brought in private tutors. I wasn't even considered a real person unless I made it into Harvard like him. When I told them I'd passed, all he said was,
"Of course you did, nothing else."
Rachel looked at the ground, her voice full of resentment as she spoke about her father's feelings toward her.
I am a person my father has no need for.
I'd never seen this side of Rachel. The confident Rachel now seemed so defeated.
You can't imagine what it's like to be considered unnecessary by your own parents. No parent could possibly feel that way about their child. Oh, but they can. Mine does. To my father. I didn't matter, hick. With that, Rachel suddenly started to cry. It would have been better if you were a boy. Your father, the day he found out you were a girl, he sighed in disappointment. He was really let down. That's what my uncle said at a family gathering. Sob. Can you imagine finding out you were born unwanted?
Rachel had spent her life with the knowledge that her father was disappointed she wasn't a son, believing she wasn't needed. Seeing her sobbing, I couldn't help but feel a deep sympathy for her.
I worked so hard for my high school exams, no matter what I did, I could never get ahead of you. I topped the tests at cram school. Did everything I could to look good for the pageant. But when I finally won first place and told him, Rachel recounted their conversation.
Dad, I won first place in the Harvard contest.
Look, I even got a medal. Oh, I see. David, did you manage to get through to the American investors? Yeah, I got the appointment. We're meeting next week. Good job. Hey, let's grab a drink and catch up tonight, and we can discuss the details. Sounds good. He didn't even glance at me.
I wanted him to see that I could be first place in something, too, that I could finally be someone he'd notice.
But he never saw me.
For him, it was always my brother.
My brother is the only person who exists for him.
Rachel sat with her hands clenched tightly on her lap, quietly looking down as tears spilled from her eyes.
At home, I have no voice. My father's word is law.
I have to follow his decisions on everything: work, marriage.
I can't go against him. It seemed I'd misunderstood her all this time.
She acted strong, kept people at arm's length, and showed such a harsh demeanor to earn her father's recognition. All she really wanted was her parents' love.
I'm sorry, Rachel.
I misjudged you.
But Rachel, the reason you're capable is because of everything you've learned through your own efforts, isn't it?
I respect you, and I know you worked hard in high school, studying when no one else was around.
I think everything you've achieved is thanks to your own perseverance. So don't look for validation from anyone else. I think, with who you are now,
you could find a lot to enjoy just for yourself.
Rachel stood up abruptly, silent for a moment, then spoke. Don't act like you know anything. You don't understand how I feel.
With that, she turned and walked toward the park entrance.
Rachel! Come on, it's time to let go of your parents. Why not make your own choices for your life?
Caught up in her story, I shouted after her as she walked away. She paused for a moment, then left the park without turning back. A few days after our talk in the park.
Oh, Rachel. What? Rachel?
I'm the new account manager here, so I'll be working with you, Rachel said as she returned to the factory, informing me that she'd be handling our account moving forward.
Oh, is that so? Looking forward to it. Rachel, it must be hot today.
Here, I chilled this towel for you to wrap around your neck, it'll feel nice.
Oh, thanks.
Since then, Rachel started coming to the factory more often, and she gradually grew comfortable talking with the employees.
Huh? What's Rachel doing over there?
Returning from an outside call, I saw her observing the factory floor.
This isn't running well. Is it broken? Did you oil it? Nope. It's just out of oil. I showed you this last time. Come on, remember it already. Oops. Sorry. Could you show me one more time? All right. Let's do it together, watch closely.
Rachel watched the exchanges in the factory with a soft smile.
Oh, Rachel, you're here. Yes. Everyone here seems to genuinely enjoy their work, don't they? Recently, Rachel's expression seemed more relaxed. Oh, Rachel, you're here? We're about to have lunch together. Want to join us? We're having a lunch gathering today, but I didn't bring anything. That's all right. People always bring extra. Right, Mr. Carter? Of course, join us. All right, let's go. At my workplace, we have a monthly lunch gathering where everyone brings their own lunch. Rachel joined in, smiling and sampling the food while everyone laughed and chatted. One day, during lunch break, as I ate alone on a bench in the park, Rachel came over and sat beside me. Oh, eating alone today? Yeah, just for a change. Rachel, are you sure it's okay for you to come by here so often? You're not really tied to my company anymore. In my father's mind, I don't exist anyway, so he doesn't care what I do. With that, I was at a loss for words. Right. Rachel also seemed at a loss, and we fell silent for a while. I've been thinking for a long time about what Mr. Thompson once said, about what we need for our own happiness. I think I'm finally starting to get it, at least a little. Unable to stand the silence any longer, I decided to share with Rachel what I'd been pondering. It's not about big moments of happiness, it's about adding up small ones. I think that's what matters most. Small moments of happiness? Yeah, like watching a beautiful sunset, smelling roses along the road, or hearing a lark's sweet song. It's like cherries instead of a big watermelon, those little joys that add up to something bigger. Ha! You probably think that's a low-level way of thinking, Rachel. Small moments of happiness. Rachel murmured softly, then fell silent as time ran out, and we left the park together. One day, I was summoned by Mr. Kensington. Wait, what? You're ending the partnership? Shockingly, he told me they were temporarily withdrawing from our collaborative product development. We're not abandoning it altogether. We'll likely pick it back up in time. But for now, please consider it paused. But if you pull out now, we don't have the budget to continue alone. Couldn't you keep supporting us just a little longer? It's not feasible at the moment. We'll come back when the time's right. When the time's right. Sounds like we're done for. After 2 hours of discussion, I couldn't change Mr. Kensington's mind. Mr. Carter. What are we supposed to do? We don't have the funding to complete this on our own. I know. But we've already set up materials and production lines. We can't just stop now. As I explained the situation to the employees, they pressed me with questions, clearly worried. Oh, Rachel. I turned at the sound of her name and saw her standing nearby with a serious expression. Rachel. Couldn't you convince your father somehow? A few employees rushed over, asking her for help. She looked distressed, overwhelmed by their pleas. I'm sorry. I asked him so many times to continue, but he just wouldn't listen. I'm really sorry. Aren't you his daughter? If you just asked properly, he'd keep going, wouldn't he? Fathers listen to their daughters, don't they? Those words struck Rachel like a knife to the heart. Surrounded by employees, she fell silent, unable to respond to the painful assumption they'd made. Look, we're not stopping here. Let's figure out a way to do this ourselves. Fortunately, our concept is solid. If we keep pushing forward, we can make this work. Don't give up now, everyone. Despite my confident words, I had no real plan. Yeah, we've got the production line ready. Let's give it our all and see it through. Exactly. We've come this far, we can't quit now. All right. Let's get back to sampling and make the best product ever. You just want an excuse to eat more, don't you? Ha, you got me. But don't go eating everyone else's share. Their laughter lifted my spirits, easing the weight of my worries, at least for now. Rachel, could we talk for a minute? I led Rachel away from the others and into the office. Rachel, we'll manage to finish this. Don't worry about it. I asked him over and over, but as I tried to reassure her, she began to explain what had happened with her father. Why are you ending the partnership? Weren't you the one who proposed it? We're starting a new deal with a Chinese company. Joining forces now will give us an opportunity to access the vast Chinese market. But Alex's factory is already far along. You can't just back out now. It sounded like Rachel had tried desperately to sway Mr. Kensington, but he refused to listen. I understand your loyalty to your old classmate, but this is business. It's common sense to move to where the profits are. Investing in a small, struggling factory like his was never our priority. Once we got the technology, we planned to cut ties anyway. No, that can't be. Let's be real, that scale of a factory won't last long. Stop wasting your time there and focus on something bigger. Hearing this, I felt my heart sink, unable to hold back the wave of shock and disappointment. Sure, it's a small factory, but the people there work so hard. Dad, don't take their jobs away. When did you start letting your emotions get the best of you? I taught you to step on others if you have to reach the top. That's why you're still a disappointment. As Rachel relayed her conversation with her father, I slumped into a chair, weighed down by a mixture of anger and despair. Since I started spending time here, I began to want to see these people succeed, to see them happy. Since Rachel had started coming to our factory, her expression had softened, and I'd often seen her laughing with the others. I've made up my mind. I won't let everyone's hard work go to waste. I'll help too. Rachel. I'm going to prove to my father and brother that my Harvard degree isn't just for show, she declared. From that moment, Rachel started coming to the factory nearly every day, working alongside us all in product development. Mr. Carter, we're here. The driver opened the door, and I buttoned up my suit as I stepped out and entered the building. This way, please. An employee led me to a room where Rachel and her brother, David, were already waiting. After our partnership with Rachel's family company ended, everyone at my factory pushed through, and we successfully launched the new product. And a few years later, that product became an incredible hit, sparking rapid growth for my company. Today, we've grown into a business with 2,000 employees. Thank you for taking the time to come here today, David said, motioning for me to sit as he and Rachel took their seats across from me. Really, we should be the ones visiting you, Mr. Carter, but thank you for making the trip here, he continued. No problem at all. My schedule is packed these days, so I appreciate you accommodating this time slot. Rachel's father passed away 3 years ago, and her brother took over the company. However, he lacked their father's business acumen, and the company began to struggle. Their partnership with a Chinese company was also terminated from the other side, with the Chinese firm walking away with only the technical information. Hearing of my company's rapid growth, Rachel's brother approached me, this time seeking financial support. Understood. If we can be of assistance, I'm happy to help. Thank you, Mr. Carter. I don't know how to express our gratitude. As the meeting wrapped up, I stood to leave for my next appointment. Mr. Carter, as a gesture of thanks, well, if you're interested, might you consider marrying my sister? Rachel is a Harvard graduate. Intelligent and beautiful, as you can see. She would be a strong addition to your status. And I believe this could be a beneficial arrangement for both sides. This man had inherited every trait from his father. He was the type to use even his own sister to save himself. This matter has nothing to do with Rachel. If that's how you see things, I'm afraid we'll have to cancel this agreement. No, please, that wasn't my intention. It's fine. I'm going with Alex, Rachel said. Could you leave us alone for a moment? After a stunned David left the room, Rachel took a seat directly across from me. I've lived my whole life without opposing my father. I always believed that following his plans would bring me happiness. But Alex, thanks to you, I realized how wrong I was. I sat in silence, listening as she opened up about her true feelings. Every time I went to the factory, everyone welcomed me warmly. Even after my father cut off support, they treated me the same. It made me so happy. After you told me at the reunion that there's no value in a life spent relying on others, I started thinking about what true happiness really is. You once said, Alex, that you treasure small moments of happiness. Yeah, I still believe that, I replied. I want to find those small moments too, and if possible, I'd like to find them with you. Completely taken by surprise, I froze, unsure of how to respond. But I know I said terrible things to you back then. You probably dislike me, so I understand if it's impossible. But even if you like just 1% of me, that would be enough. She said, her voice gradually fading into a whisper as she looked down. Rachel, can you come with me for a bit? Huh? Without waiting, I took her arm and led her to the car. Where are we going? Just come with me. We arrived at the factory I inherited from my father. Mr. Carter, what's going on? Oh, Rachel, it's been a while. Sorry, could you prepare 2 uniforms for us? I started putting on the uniform handed to me. Ha! Here's yours, Rachel. Go change. Handing her the uniform, I encouraged her to join in, and when she was done changing, I gave her a towel and work gloves and led her onto the factory floor. Rachel, I'm still the same as I was back then. If that's all right with you, let's work together here. Oh. Yes. I'll join you. With that, Rachel tied her hair back, slung the towel around her neck, and ran into the factory, pulling on her gloves. Seeing you two working together like this, Mr. Carter, you look like a married couple. A female employee teased with a laugh, and as I wiped the sweat from my forehead, standing next to Rachel, who was working hard and smiling beside me, I felt an overwhelming sense of happiness. Please use this whistle and these boots. These boots have a reinforced sole and are commonly used on work sites as safety shoes. Also, this whistle here is designed for emergencies, so it's very loud. This emergency whistle is more practical than the one you're holding. So please use this one. And I only have about $400 on me right now. The man then asked, why would you go out of your way to help a stranger like me? There was no real reason. Helping someone doesn't need a reason. In a time like this, not having someone you can rely on is one of the scariest things, I think. I give you a ride, but my car's packed with supplies for the shelter, and there's no room aside from the driver's seat. I'll inform the rescue team about you, though. Could you at least tell me your name? He slowly introduced himself. It was a name I felt I had heard somewhere before, but there was no point in overthinking it now. A year later, through an unexpected connection with this homeless man, I found myself reevaluating my own life. My name is Andrew. I turned 30 this year. Walking toward my company, I felt the heavy, humid heat and watched the shimmering haze rise from the asphalt. It's been 3 years since I started working here. After graduating college, I joined a company in Tokyo, but the workplace was such a terrible company with terrible working conditions that I quit within a year. I returned to my hometown, joined the military, retired at 27, and then transitioned to a civilian job, a bit of an unusual background. I joined the military out of sheer curiosity, but mostly because I wanted to build physical strength through daily training and feel like I was making a difference. During those few years of service, I gained a lot of valuable experiences, and even though I'm just a regular office worker now, I'm glad I joined. However, coming back to civilian life hasn't been easy. I'm so sorry, I'll redo it right away. I lowered my shoulders in frustration as I returned to my desk, feeling defeated after being scolded by my boss, who always seemed ready to lecture me. I had been doing well recently, so this mistake really threw me off, and I ended up feeling down after the reprimand. Seeing my mood, a coworker patted me on the shoulder, saying, "Don't sweat it." I gave a small smile as I turned back to my computer. At this time, our company was preparing for an important meeting with a major client, and I was tasked with preparing the materials. I was chosen because of my extensive knowledge from my military background. But having knowledge and being able to present it effectively are two different things. There was so much I wanted to convey, yet I struggled to put it into words, battling with this task. And so, I ended up making mistakes and getting scolded, trapped in a negative cycle. Man, what should I do? To reset my mind, I stepped out of the office. I stood in an open-air corridor connecting our building to the next one, drinking a can of coffee and thinking. As I gazed at a band of thin clouds, my phone rang. I took it out of my pocket and saw my brother Thomas's name on the screen. After moving to Tokyo, then going back home for my military service, I've spent the last 3 years living in Osaka. This meant I hadn't seen Thomas or parents in a long time. They would tell me to come home at least for New Year's or the summer holidays, but timing was never right, and I often had other obligations. They understood and rarely pressured me, and phone calls from them were infrequent. So, I was curious about why Thomas was calling and answered the phone. "Hey, bro, what's up?" When I asked, my usually cheerful and talkative brother sounded uncharacteristically hesitant, avoiding getting to the point. He talked about recently taking up fishing, joining local volunteer activities, and so on. Growing impatient, I asked again why he had called. Thomas let out a small sigh and quietly replied, "Our father has passed away." I stood frozen, feeling as if the air had left my lungs. "Dad! How?" I shouted, and Thomas slowly explained the circumstances. Our father had died in the line of duty. My family was made up of public servants. My mother worked for the local government, Thomas was a police officer, and my father had been a firefighter. I didn't ask for too many details, or rather, I couldn't bring myself to. But I knew my father had fulfilled his duty. In a job like his, safety is never guaranteed. Still in shock and unable to think clearly, I took leave from work, boarded the bullet train, and headed straight home. Before I knew it, we had held the funeral, and the ashes had been laid to rest. Being back at my family's home after so long, it felt strangely empty without my father. My mother seemed deeply affected, barely eating and staying in a withdrawn state. In his photo, my father wore a broad smile, as if ready to let out one of his hearty laughs at any moment. Ironically, that smile seemed to bring my mother even more pain. Thomas gave a small smile. "Mom's having a hard time, but Dad always said he wanted this picture for his memorial." And actually, he found out he was sick just before he retired.
Even to the end, Dad was himself. He put the safety of a young child above his own life. I've also sworn to put myself on the line for the safety of others as a police officer. Though, right now, Mom wants me to transfer to a safer position. Thomas had always dreamed of becoming a detective. He had long aspired to be a hero of justice. I remember how ecstatic he was when he finally received his recommendation for the detective division. While it's been a constant worry for our mother, I respect both Thomas and my father and wouldn't think to question their choices. Take care of Mom, all right? I have to head back to Osaka, but I'll make it a point to visit as often as I can. Thomas gave me a little nudge on the shoulder, saying, "Of course I will." The next day, he drove me to the station to catch my train. As I was buying my ticket, I noticed some commotion behind me. Turning around, I saw an elderly man who had just stepped off the train being greeted by a young child who ran up and hugged him. Watching nearby were a man and woman who seemed to be the child's parents. It was a heartwarming scene, a reunion between a grandfather and his grandchild. With that image in my mind, I boarded the train back to Osaka, staring out the window as memories surfaced. Suddenly, I remembered something from years ago. Our hometown was hit by an earthquake about 20 years ago. Thomas and I, both in elementary school at the time, experienced the quake alone at home before our parents could get back. We huddled together in fear as the house shook around us. Thankfully, it wasn't a massive quake, the house held up, and only a few pieces of furniture fell over. Still, as young brothers, we were frozen in fear and couldn't move. At that moment, our neighbor, known affectionately as Buddy, came to our rescue. He was an off-duty firefighter who happened to be home that day. Knowing us well and worried we might be at home, he came over to check on us. During the panic, I had accidentally stepped on broken glass, injuring my foot. Buddy immediately treated my wound, contacted our parents, and took us to the shelter, making sure we were safe. It was a moment I could never forget. That experience likely sparked Thomas's dream of becoming a hero. I, too, wanted to help others like that, but I wasn't very strong at the time, and my mother was adamant that I didn't pursue that path. So I entered the private sector. Ironically, the job turned out to be terrible, and when I told my mother I planned to join the military and move back home, even she had no objections. All those experiences have taught me the importance of being prepared for emergencies. The key is to stay calm. Panicking can lead to unexpected trouble, so taking it slow and steady is essential. Lost in thought, I soon found myself arriving at Osaka Station, and from there, I took a local train back home. The next day, a coworker said something to me. Maybe an earthquake will hit somewhere nearby soon. I recalled the strange, fan-shaped cloud I had seen that day. No, it's just superstition, I told myself, the kind of thing that people who like the occult use to connect unrelated phenomena to earthquakes. With that thought, I forced myself to get back to work. So, yeah, I managed to finish the task, but then my boss ended up crashing the computer. Physically, I mean. He tripped over the cables. And everything just went down, even though IT keeps warning everyone to watch out for them. That evening, I called Thomas. I couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease and wanted to hear his voice to calm myself. He listened, laughing at my story, and we chatted about random things for a while. By the way, how's Mom doing? She's still down, but she's getting better. Today, the parents and grandfather of the child Dad saved came by to pay their respects. Thanks to Dad. The kid only inhaled a bit of smoke and was able to leave the hospital. They apologized over and over, so I told them. Dad didn't save your child to be apologized to, he did it to hear you say thank you.
If Dad were still here, that's exactly what he would have wanted to hear. He'd always been that way. By the way, have you done any disaster prep? Thomas sounded puzzled by my sudden question. Oh, at work, I've been involved in some disaster planning projects. I'm in sales, so I'm not hands-on with it, but you know, things like reviewing hazard maps, preparing emergency kits. Are you all set? Well, Dad took care of a lot, but I don't remember exactly what he did. Okay, then. I'll come back next weekend, and we can make sure everything's ready. Thomas laughed, wondering aloud what had gotten into me. If I were in his shoes, I'd probably be laughing, too. But I couldn't shake my coworker's comment that morning or the image of that cloud I'd seen recently. Better safe than sorry. Living in Japan, we have to recognize that natural disasters are an ever-present reality. Earthquakes don't just bring shaking, they unleash a cascade of secondary effects. Fires, ground ruptures, landslides, aftershocks, and even crime, like break-ins, can spike. When I was in the military, I once joined a disaster relief mission in an affected area. I learned a lot from that experience and came to understand how crucial it is to have preparations in place. My father, as a firefighter, surely knew this well, but it seemed Thomas and Mother hadn't given it much thought. Even though I told them I'd be coming home to check, they insisted it wasn't necessary or said they'd handle it. But I didn't back down and, as promised, went home the following Saturday. By then, my mother seemed to be recovering emotionally and welcomed me with a smile. As Thomas and I walked around the neighborhood, we passed the house that had burned down. It happened early in the morning, and the neighbors woke up in shock. Seems like it was caused by some drunk person's cigarette. It was a Friday night, after all. This family didn't even smoke, and their house was fully electric with no gas. Knowing that just makes it more heartbreaking. Thomas gave a bitter smile. The family was now renting an apartment while they figured things out. They had come by to pay their respects, but Thomas told them they didn't have to feel obligated to keep visiting. They weren't to blame for any of it, after all. And for Mom's sake, too. I keep trying to stay strong, but it's hard. I really miss Dad. Seeing the pain on Thomas's face struck something deep inside me. After checking evacuation routes, we stopped by an old noodle shop. It had been here since we were kids and had held its ground despite chain stores popping up everywhere. The noodles were still just as delicious. As I enjoyed the smooth noodles, I noticed a heavy-looking cloud outside the window. That cloud, it looks pretty intense. An earthquake cloud, maybe? Not a good omen. We left the shop, went over the disaster supplies one last time, and I headed back home Sunday afternoon. Then, it happened suddenly. A piercing alarm jolted me awake. Earthquake alert. Prepare for strong shaking. The AI on my phone blurted out the warning just as my apartment started to tremble. Fortunately, our area didn't shake that much, so the neighbors still had the composure to say things like, "Wow, that was a shake," or "That was scary." But as soon as I checked my phone, a chill ran down my spine. The epicenter of the earthquake was alarmingly close to my hometown. I immediately tried calling Thomas and Mom, but I couldn't get through. As each second passed, my heartbeat grew louder with anxiety. Though I couldn't reach them at first, as dawn broke, I finally got a call from Thomas. "Are you okay, man?" "How about Mom?" "Calm down." I snapped back to my senses. Yes, in times like these, staying calm and acting rationally is the best approach. Following his advice, I took a deep breath. "So, you're safe, right?" Upon asking, Thomas reassured me that she was okay too.
Thanks to going over the evacuation route and disaster supplies with you, we were ready.
When the house shook, I woke Mom up, and we got under the table.
We grabbed our emergency kits, wore our safety boots, and made it to the shelter. I had to help with evacuating other people, so I couldn't call right away, sorry. Relieved to hear they were safe, I felt a weight lift from my chest.
But things still weren't looking good.
Local police, fire crews, and the military are on site now. I need to get back to work, so I'll have to hang up, but know we're safe.
Don't worry too much. With that, he ended the call. Even with his reassurance, I couldn't help but feel anxious.
The fact they wore safety boots to evacuate meant buildings had likely collapsed nearby. While my family was okay, I doubted everyone in the area was as prepared.
I'm going.
Since aftershocks posed a serious risk, rushing there immediately wasn't wise. I waited, assessing the timing, and set out once I felt it was safe. Driving alone was one of my hobbies, and I was thankful I had invested in a minivan, even though I lived by myself. I filled up the gas tank so I wouldn't have to refuel on site and packed a portable toilet. Of course, the tires are snow tires, and I have a spare ready as well.
After several hours of driving, I finally arrived in the area.
Careful to avoid interfering with the rescue teams, I parked nearby. As night fell, rescue operations paused, and I watched as workers wrapped up for the evening. Preparing to sleep in my car, I suddenly heard the faint sound of a whistle. I strained to listen. A soft peep sounded again. Stepping out of the car, I followed the noise to what was left of an apartment building. There, I saw a man huddled on the ground. His clothes were tattered, and he was trembling with fear, likely homeless. Noticing me, he let out a small gasp.
"Ah,
It's okay, I'm not with the rescue team, but are you all right?" When I asked that, the man who appeared to be homeless gave a small nod. I didn't know why he was here, but leaving him alone was dangerous. I went back to my car and grabbed a few items.
please use this whistle and these boots."
These boots have reinforced soles and are commonly used as safety gear on work sites. This whistle here is designed for emergencies, so it's much louder than yours.
Use this one instead. And I only have about $400 on me right now. The man looked at me and asked, "Why are you helping a stranger like me?"
There was no need for a reason.
You don't need a reason to help someone.
In a tough time like this, having no one to turn to is the scariest thing.
I'd give you a ride.
But I've packed my car with food for the shelter, and there's no space except for the driver's seat. I'll let the rescue team know you're here.
Could you at least tell me your name?
He introduced himself as Travis Morris. I thought I'd heard the name somewhere, but there was no time to think about that now.
"Ah, here, take this, too. It's some emergency food and a fan."
It's hot, so stay hydrated and use these salt tablets to help you through the night.
This was all I could do for now.
At night, with limited visibility, there was a higher risk of falling or getting hurt, so I advised him not to move around too much. Thankfully, the building he was by had already collapsed, so further harm was unlikely there. It would be far worse if he tried to leave for help and ended up caught in an aftershock, with debris falling on him. That's why I thought it was wiser for him to stay put until dawn. The man thanked me repeatedly, so I gave a slight bow before getting back into my car to spend the night safely there. The next day, I finally reached the shelter and reunited with Thomas and Mom.
A year flew by after that.
Since our house was too damaged to live in, Thomas and Mom moved into my apartment in Osaka right after the earthquake. I had rented a 2-bedroom place because I dislike cramped spaces, so there was no issue with them staying.
Eventually, Thomas returned home to resume his duties.
Mom found a part-time job, saving money as she looked forward to the day she could return to where our home once stood. After a year, recovery was well underway. The town was slowly regaining its vitality, and many people had begun to rebuild their lives, thanks to support from all over Japan. At this time, I was actively coordinating with a construction company to plan the rebuilding of our family home. Meanwhile, I was gearing up for an important business meeting, wearing a crisp suit and taking deep breaths to steady my nerves. It was a major negotiation with a big company, and if we succeeded, it would mean significant growth for our firm.
With encouragement from my boss and colleagues, I entered the meeting room.
The chairman is waiting for you, our hero. The beautiful secretary who had shown me to the room suddenly said that, causing me to widen my eyes in surprise. But the door opened, and I hurried inside to introduce myself.
Nice to meet you. My name is Andrew, and I'll be handling this meeting.
My voice cracked slightly, and I regretted it immediately.
Well, hello there.
When I looked up, I saw something that took me aback, a whistle hanging from the person's neck. I had expected the representative to be a woman around my age, but before me sat a man who looked to be in his late 60s or early 70s. As I tried to piece things together, the man smiled warmly and motioned for me to take a seat on the sofa. As I cautiously took a seat and looked at his face again, I couldn't help but blurt out, "Ha!
Aren't you the man I saw meeting your grandson on the station platform?"
Oh.
And how do you know that?
It was the elderly man I had seen in that touching reunion when I returned to Osaka after my father's passing.
I have a pretty good memory, so I tend to remember things that leave an impression.
At that time, I thought they were a family having an emotional reunion as I watched them. Well, to be fair, what made it stand out even more was that the older man wasn't fully Japanese and had striking blue eyes.
Then, something else clicked. Are you Chairman Morris?
Yes,
that's right.
I had known that the chairman of the company we were negotiating with was a foreigner. Apparently, he had come to Japan with his parents as a child, gained Japanese citizenship, married a Japanese woman, and adopted her family name.
But why? I thought I was supposed to meet with Ms. Natalie? I asked to meet you after I heard your name. I grew more confused.
I thought Mr. Morris and I were meeting for the first time, but somehow, our conversation just isn't aligning. Then, Mr. Morris said something that connected all the dots.
Back then, you used to call me Buddy, remember?
The Buddy, that's what I used to call a man in his late 40s who once lived nearby. I never knew his actual name, but he had beautiful blue eyes.
Wait, you are that Buddy?
Yes, indeed.
And it's so good to see you doing well, Andrew. I couldn't help but gasp. The coincidence was astounding. I can't thank your father enough for saving my grandson. As a former firefighter myself, I hold your father in the highest regard. Thank you for what he did. I was speechless.
Despite having so many things I wanted to say and questions I wanted to ask, I couldn't find the words. Piece by piece, the scattered facts started falling into place like a puzzle coming together. Mr. Morris was the same Buddy who had helped Thomas and me as kids. He was also the elderly man I had seen reuniting with his family at the train station. And that family was the one affected by the fire. The young girl who had run to hug him was the very child my father had risked his life to save. Upon hearing about the fire, he had apparently gone out of his way to check on things.
It seems we just missed each other as I was heading back to Osaka.
Afterward, Thomas had mentioned the child, her parents, and her grandfather came to pay their respects with incense.
And I realized it was the same family I had seen that day.
So that's what happened. When Thomas and I walked around our neighborhood checking hazard maps, I saw the house that had burned down and thought how close it was.
Now I know it was actually your house, Mr. Morris. Oh, by the way, about that whistle? I glanced at the whistle hanging from his neck. He took it off and placed it on the desk. It was unmistakably the same type of whistle I had given to the homeless man that night. But I was sure that man had looked fully Japanese. Although it was dark, his black hair and eyes left no doubt. Then, Mr. Morris dropped a revelation that caught me off guard. The man you thought was homeless, the one you helped, that was my son. We had been estranged for a while, with no way to contact him. By some twist of fate, we reconnected. After being laid off from his job, he found himself on the streets. He told me that a young man had given him safety boots, an emergency whistle, and $400 when he had no one to turn to. That same man contacted the rescue team, who eventually got him to safety. Indeed, when I had asked for his name, he had said, Travis Morris. Mr. Morris was fully foreign-born, but his wife was Japanese. When a child is born between a Japanese person and a foreigner, the genes for black hair and dark eyes are often dominant, resulting in a look closer to Japanese features. Since it was nighttime, I couldn't quite tell if he was of mixed heritage, but hearing his story, everything now makes more sense. While reflecting on this, he bowed his head. Startled, I stammered, "Oh." But he continued speaking in that position. "Thank you for saving my son. Although he's my eldest, he has never married and has no one to lean on. Pride held him back from seeking help from us, his family. But when a complete stranger helped him, he found it odd to keep holding on to his pride. And he reached out to us through the rescue team." Then, a question crossed my mind. "Wait, I didn't tell him my name. How did you know it was me?" Mr. Morris smiled faintly and picked up the emergency whistle. Then, he gave a light tap on the bottom. When he handed it to me, I looked closely and saw small letters written in what looked like permanent marker. On it were the words, Dad. There, in unmistakable handwriting, were the words "Family comes first," written by my father. Back then, I'd had a few emergency whistles on me and had given one to that man. I never imagined it was my father's keepsake. I had noticed it was missing but had assumed it was simply helping someone else, and that was enough for me. Still, a part of me had felt the loss. I never expected it would come back to me in such a way. Before I knew it, tears had started to fall from my eyes. "Although we were in different units, I knew your father," Mr. Morris said, his voice distant but kind. As a fellow firefighter, I had great respect for him. He always wore a smile, encouraged younger recruits through the toughest training, and was highly regarded by all. He used to say, almost as a mantra, that no matter what happens, family comes first. That's how I recognized who owned this whistle. His voice seemed to grow distant as emotions flooded through me. There had been times when I felt my father cared more about the safety of the people in our community than about his own family. And it made me feel a quiet ache. But seeing those words, "Family comes first," made me want to cry without holding back. When I learned that it was your father who saved my granddaughter, I was in awe. After leaving the firefighting profession, I built this company and followed a different path, but your father remained a noble firefighter to the end. I hold the utmost respect for him. This whistle of his has brought my son and me back together. Your family has saved mine not once but twice, including you. That's why I can't lift my head." With those words, Mr. Morris stubbornly kept his posture, no matter what I said. After he held that position for such a long time, I finally said,
I understand your feelings.
So please, I ask you, raise your head. Slowly, he straightened up and looked at me intently.
I came here today to tell you in person that our company would like to proceed with this deal.
With someone as remarkable as you, there's no other answer but yes. We'd be honored to support your company's efforts. We shook hands firmly. When I returned to the office, my colleagues and boss immediately asked how it went. When I told them Mr. Morris had agreed to the partnership without hesitation, everyone was astounded. The company led by Mr. Morris focuses primarily on landslide prevention, river projects, and road construction. With a former firefighter at the helm, they seem to put a great deal of effort into these areas. Our company, focused on disaster preparedness supplies, had aimed to strengthen our offerings by partnering with his company. With his unwavering support, the project was a huge success, and I was even offered a promotion. However, I turned it down. I've decided to return to my hometown. Our family home is finally close to being rebuilt, and I feel like I've found my true purpose. Thank you for everything until now.
And so, I left Osaka and returned to our hometown with my mother, where Thomas was waiting. It was almost unbelievable. The rubble was cleared, and new homes had sprung up as if the devastation had never happened. Our home, too, had been rebuilt as a single-story house. To celebrate, the family my father saved, along with Mr. Morris and his eldest son, Travis, came to visit.
What a lovely home. It's warm and comfortable, just like your father. That one comment filled my heart with warmth. We had overcome so much to reach this point. Perhaps everything in our lives had been revolving around my father all along.
After sharing stories, we made our way to the hilltop cemetery. The earthquake hadn't affected it, and our family's gravesite was undamaged. Here, my father rested in peace. The Morris family stood in silent prayer for a long while. My mother, now fully healed, expressed her relief at seeing the young girl her husband saved growing up strong and healthy. And then, with a bright, innocent smile, that child spoke to my father, resting there.
When I grow up, I want to be a firefighter, too. Thomas and I exchanged glances, then looked over at Mr. Morris.
He was the hero who had once saved us. Inspired by that hero, Thomas had chosen to become a police officer. And it was our father who had saved the life of that hero's family. The little girl, now grown, wanted to follow in his footsteps, just as we once had, hoping to become someone who could save others. Everything really does come full circle. I murmured, and Thomas nodded in quiet agreement. Nothing was ever in vain, he said softly. The lives Dad saved are finding new hope in the future, and someday, they'll blossom.
Nothing is stronger than the will to help others. There will be tough times ahead, but all we can do is keep moving forward. I looked down at the words inscribed on the bottom of my emergency whistle once more. Family comes first. Maybe, in that little girl, my father had seen the younger versions of Thomas and me. If something happened to her, her parents would be devastated. Knowing my father's gentle heart, he had likely been overwhelmed by that thought and prioritized her rescue. Hey, bro, I think I'm going to try becoming a firefighter myself. The wind swept my words away, but I was sure they reached my father up in heaven. Don't make me spell out why you got demoted. Just look in the mirror, it's obvious, right? With a laugh, my boss traced his finger over his face. He was clearly referring to the large scar on mine. Even with this face, I thought I had worked hard. I had delivered results, too. But in the end, the reason for my demotion was not be able to trust someone with a face like that in sales. However, the beautiful woman I met after the demotion cried when she saw my scar. Finally, I've found you.
Meeting her would go on to change my life in ways I couldn't have imagined.
Hey, Bear. Did you cut your bangs a bit? Looks great. Why don't you go show that off to our best clients? Haha, got it.
I packed the catalogs in my bag and started getting ready, feeling a bit nervous but excited.
My name is Robert Beringer. I'm a sales rep at an industrial machine manufacturing company.
When I first joined, I wasn't sure I could handle sales, but recently, I've been getting the hang of it. I've even gotten better at making eye contact when talking with clients. The reason it took me so long to get comfortable in sales, and the reason my senior complimented my haircut, are both the same.
It's because of my face. I have a large scar from an injury in the past. It runs from between my eyebrows, across the space between my eyes, and down to the side of my nose, like a line drawn across my face. Back in school, I could brush it off, but once I entered the workforce, it became a real obstacle. When I was assigned to the sales department, I grew out my bangs to try and cover it up. But I couldn't grow them long enough to hide everything. What helped me move past it were my understanding senior and, most importantly, our loyal clients. Many people appreciated how clearly I could explain the machines. It gave me courage and confidence. A lot of them even suggested I cut my hair, so I figured they'd be happy to see it. Feeling proud, I was about to head out for my rounds. But then I heard a voice behind me. Like a monster trying to befriend humans, huh? I turned around and saw my supervisor, in an expensive suit, his hair slicked back. Robert, you've had your hair cut, huh? What a waste. If you'd grown it longer, you might have been able to cover that scar. Not that anyone would see your face then. The one running his hand through his hair, as if to mock me, was my supervisor, Mark. Mark was the head of my sales team, and he'd been like this toward me ever since I started. Normally, someone in higher position would have stepped in to stop him. But Mark's father was on the company board and related to one of our biggest clients. In other words, nobody dared to interfere with him. Mark. I just wanted a fresh cut. Excuse me. Did you see that face? Man, what are we gonna do if we lose clients cause of him? Ignoring his snide remark, I left the office. When I first started, his comments used to get to me. But not anymore. I was confident that I could now face the world with my head held high. Or so I thought. But a few days later, I was suddenly called into the conference room and handed a transfer notice. No, it wasn't just a transfer. Being reassigned to a desk job far from our newly established headquarters was essentially a demotion. Why? I may have been slow to start, but I'm finally delivering results. Why this? In the room were the department head, Michael, and Mark. Michael just sat with his arms crossed, staring at the corner of the table. This was when I was about to plead my case further. Mark crossed his legs, turned to face me, and with a smirk, said, "Don't make me spell out why you got demoted. Just look in the mirror, it's obvious, right?" As he said this, Mark traced his finger over his face, laughing. He was clearly referring to the large scar on mine. Even with this face, I thought I had worked hard. I had delivered results, too. But in the end, the reason for my demotion was we can't trust someone with a face like that in sales. And so, I was transferred to a branch far from the headquarters. On my first day at the new branch, I was feeling nervous for the first time in a while. Maybe it wasn't just nerves, I was still dwelling on the day I learned about the demotion. Regretfully, I walked through the industrial area, away from the city center, thinking about why I had my haircut in the first place. Excuse me. My name is Robert Beringer.
and I'll be working here starting today. Although this was a small, remote branch, the building was brand new and clean.
I knocked on the door and called out. Soon, an older man with a kind demeanor approached. Sorry to keep you waiting. You're Robert, right?
I'm Kevin, the branch manager here.
Nice to meet you. Ah, yes.
We've got one more person here, but she's out running an errand.
Robert, are you feeling okay? Was the trip too far? You're looking down. Do you need to take a break? No. I'm fine, really.
When I finally managed to look up, I saw that Kevin's face was full of genuine concern for me.
Relieved by my response, he led me to my desk.
As we walked, he kept up the conversation, and I quickly realized he was a kind person.
But I couldn't help wondering, what could I do in a branch with only 3 people, including myself?
Just as I was looking up at the ceiling, feeling lost, Kevin suddenly exclaimed,
Whoa! Robert, that scar, was that from an injury?
Kevin, seeing the scar on my face for the first time, reacted with exaggerated surprise.
In an instant, memories from the past flooded back.
On my first day in the sales department, everyone avoided mentioning the scar, as if walking on eggshells. Only Mark had reacted like Kevin just did. It seemed all the resilience I'd built up against judgments on my appearance had melted away. I was left speechless, and Kevin, realizing his mistake, was about to say something to recover.
But just then, the office door flew open. I'm back. Who knew buying a duct tape would take so long?
Oh. The woman who walked in, carrying a bag from the hardware store, had a short bob haircut. Her natural makeup only highlighted how beautiful she was. I couldn't help but wonder why someone like her would be working in such a remote place. Without realizing it, I had been staring straight at her.
She was looking at me, too. Oh, Catherine.
This is Robert, our new team member starting today. In a hurry to break the frozen atmosphere, Kevin quickly introduced me.
Snapping out of it, I quickly lowered my head and introduced myself. I'm Robert. I'll be Bear, right? Ha! I've heard all about you. The work here might be different from what you're used to, but let's do our best together.
Once again, I found myself looking up, but Catherine was smiling at me warmly.
Was she not seeing my scar?
Yet somehow, as if I had forgotten all about the scar myself, I was smiling back at her.
So, what's the tape for? Oh, this?
The photocopier's acting up, and since the repair guy's far away, I thought I'd try to fix it with this.
Ah, I see. Wait, what? I have some documents I need to print, but the copier isn't working. Kevin tried hitting it, but not only did it not fix it, now it's cracked.
With a sigh, I headed over to the photocopier.
Sure enough, the display showed an error, and the paper tray had a noticeable crack.
It was clearly a network issue, but these two genuinely seemed to think they could fix it with duct tape. As I scratched my head in frustration, Catherine peeked over my shoulder.
Bear,
are you good with this kind of stuff?
Yeah, kind of.
Despite feeling increasingly unsure about working here, I knew I had to deal with this situation first, so I turned to Catherine. I was so caught up in my anxiety that I hadn't noticed how close Catherine's face had gotten, almost touching the tip of my nose.
No wonder I had noticed that pleasant scent.
I quickly turned my face away and opened the photocopier, explaining step by step to Catherine.
Catherine, can you call the service provider and request a replacement for this part? I'll handle the error in the meantime. Kevin, I'll need to use this computer. Wait, you can fix it, Robert.
I brushed off Kevin's exaggerated surprise and booted up the computer. This branch was supposed to be less than 6 months old, but everything felt completely unorganized. I connected the photocopier to the network and tried printing a test page. As soon as the machine made startup sounds, the two of them erupted into applause. Amazing, Bear. You can fix computers and machines too. Well, I used to be in sales. And we also handle photocopiers, so I know a thing or two. Just please don't hit it when it starts acting up again. Both Catherine and Kevin nodded enthusiastically, clearly impressed by the repair. Watching them reminded me of a similar situation with a customer during a maintenance visit. They were desperate and so grateful when I helped them. Come to think of it, that was when I started to feel more confident about working in sales with this face. I found myself remembering that moment, but now that I had been demoted, it no longer mattered. There's no sales work here at all. It's mainly helping other offices, handling deliveries, and doing final order checks. That's probably why I was sent to a place like this, far from the city. While Catherine had been out buying tape, Kevin had given me a brief introduction. Kevin was originally at another branch, but he was promoted to become the manager of this one. He jokingly called it a promotion in name only. What surprised me even more was Catherine. It was shocking enough when I heard about her background, but seeing her in person made it even more so. She was the president's daughter. Apparently, she had requested to work out here in this remote branch. Both of my superiors were a bit of a mystery, but I wasn't ready to get too involved just yet. The next day, I was upgrading my computer, Catherine was preparing direct mailings, and Kevin was drinking tea. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed. Catherine started to get up, but as the lowest ranking person, I quickly handled it. Hello, how can I help you? Sorry to bother you all of a sudden. I'm from the factory next door. Excuse me. Just a moment, please. I checked with Kevin. He said we had introduced ourselves to them when the branch first opened, but they weren't a client, and this was the first time they'd visited. I got his permission and went outside. A man, still in his work clothes, looked like he had rushed out in a panic. I'm Robert. How can I help you? I know this is out of line, but please, we need help. One of our machines suddenly broke down, and the repair guy can't come today. If we miss this deadline, we're done. Could you please take a look? We'll pay you, of course. For a factory, missing a deadline can be catastrophic. But we usually don't accept requests from non-clients. The times I'd fixed other things were purely because I wanted to help. There were, of course, employees who would have simply refused. But what's the point of having a branch out here, in the middle of nowhere with no clients, if we don't help when someone asks? I couldn't just leave this man, who looked like he was about to get on his knees and beg. I'll step out for a bit. What? Robert. I rushed over to the factory. Inside, a group of people, looking lost and anxious, stood around helplessly. I was led to the malfunctioning machine and quickly got an explanation of the situation. It wasn't one of our machines, but since the issue didn't involve any proprietary technology, I was able to get it running again in under 30 minutes. That should do it. It's a more complex error, so make sure to have your technician check it out later. Oh, thank goodness. Thank you so much. Now we can make the deadline. I'll come by to properly thank you later. Don't worry about that for now. Just focus on your work. Take care. As I left the factory, receiving their repeated thanks, I couldn't help but sigh.
I was already rushing into things on just my second day after the transfer. Bear. Catherine, why are you here? I rushed over after finishing up. I'm so glad you fixed the machine. You're amazing. She grabbed my dirt-covered hand and, with a bright smile, looked me in the eye. Don't worry about the company rules, I'll handle that. I'm just so glad you were here. Kevin and I wouldn't have been able to help. As Catherine pulled me along, I couldn't help but laugh, remembering the whole photocopier incident. When we got back to the office, Kevin thanked me for my hard work. I spent the rest of the day deep in thought. This area is full of old factories. The factory I just visited didn't have outdated equipment, but their machines were vulnerable to accidents. They're essentially being left behind by technology. We got away with helping this time, but if anything else happens, we won't be able to offer assistance. That's just how the company operates. Even though I knew that in my head, my eyes and hands were glued to my computer. The next morning, I woke up at my desk. The smell of coffee greeted me as Catherine approached. Oh, did I wake you up? Good morning. Here, coffee and a sandwich for you. Wait. What? Oh, did I stay the night? I'm sorry, let me pay you back. Don't worry about it, I made them. Ha, you said you were going to stay late, but I had a feeling you'd pull an all-nighter. So I came in early, and I was right. What were you working on? I felt a little flustered by the fact that Catherine had gone out of her way to make me a sandwich, but I calmly explained. Let me say up front, this is more of a hobby idea. Yesterday, after going to the factory, I started thinking. It's just for this area, but what about a troubleshooting network service? Like a help service? Pretty much. In this area, regular maintenance intervals tend to be long. What if we offered to handle that? Deadlines are critical for factories. We could monitor the machine data online, and if something looks off, we could check it before a problem occurs. As a business model, maybe a monthly subscription. We'd either partner with the original service providers or... I laughed while explaining this hypothetical idea, eating the sandwich she made. It was so good I was about to thank her when... Wait, Bear, you can actually make that? Ha! Well, I stayed up all night trying to figure it out, and I did end up pulling an all-nighter. You made it. Catherine looked at me in shock, her eyes serious. I felt a bit uneasy that she was listening so intently to something I had just casually come up with. Well, it's not ready to go to market, but I managed to make a prototype. I have a bunch of IT certifications, so want to take a look at the program? All it needs now is to input the machine data. Bear. Yes. Let's do this. Ha! While I was confused, Catherine's smile shone even brighter than usual. Just 5 minutes before the start of the day, right after Kevin arrived at the office, the intercom buzzed again. It was the person from the factory yesterday. Catherine led him into a makeshift meeting room partitioned off from the main area. Probably about yesterday. I've already prepared the invoice, so it saves us the trouble of delivering it. He's an honest man, Kevin remarked. Impressed. While Kevin seemed pleased, something about the earlier conversation between Catherine and the factory worker didn't sit right with me. If it was just about handing over an invoice, it should have been quick. Kevin seemed to be wondering, too, as the conversation was taking longer than expected. Just then, Catherine called for me. Carrying the tea I had prepared, I made my way to the meeting room. For some reason, the atmosphere was serious.
When I made eye contact with Catherine, she pointed at me and said something completely unexpected. Robert, who handled the work yesterday, will fully back this project.
So, what do you think? Since we've established a connection, would you be willing to participate in the trial run of our troubleshooting service? Robert and I will come by again soon to explain everything in detail. Oh, it was him.
He worked so quickly and knows his way around tech.
We've been putting off solving issues like this for a while now. All right. I'll trust you with it. Thank you very much.
While still holding the tea I hadn't managed to serve, I watched as the two shook hands firmly.
Caught up in the flow, I bowed in thanks and saw the man out. What is going on here, Catherine? Robert, Kevin. We're about to start something new. I quickly glanced at Kevin.
He was stroking his chin, deep in thought.
Robert, could you explain this in simpler terms for me as well? Catherine, it looks like it's really happening. Yes. Thanks to Bear, we're going to make this project a success. I was completely left in the dark. There were so many things I wanted to ask, but I couldn't find the words.
For now, I was told to refine the software before our follow-up meeting in 3 days. Setting an appointment to introduce a new system, this was full-on sales work. Writing the program was fine, but the thought of having to do sales again made me hesitate.
What if my scarred face ruined everything again?
The memories of my past struggles began to flood my mind.
Without saying anything, I went back to my desk and started coding.
I figured that if I finished the materials, either Catherine or Kevin could handle the presentation.
I kept typing away at the computer, even after they had left for the day.
I wasn't doing it for them, I was driven by the sole purpose of making the program perfect so I wouldn't have to go to the sales meeting myself. Finally, I looked up from the computer and stretched my neck toward the ceiling. That's when I heard a noise coming from the meeting room.
It was already past 9 p.m.
Holding my breath, I quietly peeked through the gap in the partition.
What?
There, lying across a few chairs, was Catherine. It looked like she had slid off the desk she had been resting on. Her tight skirt had ridden up, her legs were spread out, and her blouse had shifted up as well, exposing more than she probably intended.
She seemed to be asleep.
But perhaps because the blouse was uncomfortable, she unconsciously began to unbutton it from the top. Panicking, I rushed over to carefully prop her up, making sure her clothes didn't get more disheveled.
Catherine. Yawn.
Oh, Bear.
I thought you had gone home. I may be your boss, but I've got your back. Here, I brought some late-night snacks.
With a smile, Catherine pulled out a bento box and a thermos of soup.
We ended up having dinner right there.
The colorful, hearty bento was absolutely delicious, and the warm soup seeped into my body, revitalizing me. I couldn't help but notice her blouse was still slightly open, so I kept my gaze down, avoiding it. As I slowly sipped my soup, Catherine started to speak softly.
Sorry for pushing things forward without asking. I just felt like with you, Bear, we could really make it happen. But I must have put you in a tough spot, didn't I?
No, I wouldn't say that. I glanced at her, but she didn't look convinced. Unable to withstand her gaze any longer, I brought up what had been on my mind.
Catherine, you said you'd heard about me before. What exactly did you hear?
Yeah. She set her mug down and continued.
It wasn't good stuff.
I believe it was your old supervisor, Mark.
He went out of his way to contact me. And
I decided not to believe him.
What? No one but me can truly know Bear. so I just ignored what he said. And, turns out you're exactly the person I thought you'd be. Catherine looked at me with a gentle, soft smile, not just a regular grin. Flustered, I blurted out, "What do you mean by that?" "Let me guess, Mark told you about my scar, didn't he?" "He did. But to me, bear is bear, scar and all. It didn't really register." Was that insensitive? The very scar that had tormented me, the one that I had agonized over since joining the company. She looked at it straight on and said it didn't matter to her. Ha ha. What's so funny? No, you're just different, Catherine. I'm not different at all. For some reason, her words quickly lifted me out of the spiral of my past, making me feel optimistic again. 3 days later, Catherine and I visited the factory. I had finished the prototype program, and I was able to give a simple demonstration during our explanation. What surprised me was Catherine's rapport with the factory workers. I hadn't known, but she had been regularly visiting the surrounding factories. In fact, she was already well acquainted with most of them. Her genuine personality was widely known and respected in the area. Thanks to that, the factory agreed to help with the trial run of the program. For the first time, I was able to look them in the eye and sincerely thank them. As we were about to leave, the factory manager hesitated before speaking. Robert, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but what is it? That scar on your face. Does it bother you? When you helped us before, you barely made eye contact. I figured it was because I put too much pressure on you. He seemed hesitant to bring it up, but he spoke honestly. I felt that I should also respond with the same honesty. To be honest, when I first came here, I was worried about how people would perceive me. But I've changed. I can't work with someone and not look them in the eye, especially if we're going to be working together. Ha ha. Looks like you've come to terms with something. Seems my advice wasn't needed after all. Ha! When I reacted in surprise, he rolled up the leg of his work pants. A thick, straight surgery scar ran down his calf. In this line of work, even small mistakes can lead to something serious like this. You're young, and I'm sure you've been through harder times than I have. But despite that, you've helped us out and found ways to make our work easier. I trust you completely. His smile was so genuine, it almost brought me to tears. Standing beside me, Catherine smiled and playfully bumped her shoulder against mine. I'll give it my all. I bowed deeply and returned to the office. As I walked back in, I noticed Kevin pacing around. Oh, you're back. How did it go? Everything work out? Yes, I secured the trial cooperation agreement. I'll do my best. That's great. Good. Kevin seemed a bit off, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. Just as I was about to rush back to my desk, I felt a strong tug on my back. Kevin. Robert. I've been meaning to apologize. Kevin, looking uncomfortable, lowered his gaze and fidgeted with his arms as he began to speak. I've been thinking about it for a while. I owe you an apology. On your first day, I said something insensitive about the scar on your face. I reacted based on the information I'd heard beforehand, and I'm really sorry. You're such an honest and hard-working person, and I misjudged you. It's fine. Your reaction was normal. I'm okay with it now. Let's keep working together, Kevin. Thank you. Bear. Ha? Wait, that name. Let's keep going strong, Bear.
With Catherine suddenly jumping into the conversation, I was officially dubbed Bear at the branch. I had been called that by close friends before, so in a way, I felt like I was finally settling in with the team. After work that day, Catherine and I decided to have a small celebration. Kevin couldn't join us since it was his child's birthday, so we planned to celebrate with him another day. I thought about suggesting that we wait until all three of us could get together, but that was just an excuse. In truth, I was grateful for the chance to have dinner alone with Catherine. She took me to a nearby food stall bar within walking distance. It had plenty of tables and chairs, and it seemed to be a popular spot for people working in the area to relax and unwind. "Hey, boss. Two of the usual, please." To my surprise, Catherine seemed to be a regular. She greeted the people who were already there with a friendly familiarity, exchanging casual hellos with them. "Catherine, do you come here often?" "I didn't expect that. This place is really delicious. Plus, you can hear all sorts of interesting stories from people around here." "I see." We toasted and celebrated the beginning of our new project. "The project's going to rely a lot on you, Bear, but I'll be there to fully support you. Let me know if you need anything." Well, I might have to ask for more of your sandwiches then." "Got it." No, I was joking." I laughed, but when I looked forward, Catherine was resting her chin in her hands, her cheeks slightly flushed, probably from the alcohol. She was gazing at me intently. Then, wrapping one arm around her shoulder, she lowered her eyes and asked, "Bear, can I scoot a little closer?" Sure." "It's getting crowded, right?" The place wasn't really that packed, but I needed some excuse to keep my heart from racing. Catherine placed her glass on the table and moved her chair right next to mine. The chairs were now touching each other. Even in a place like this, her familiar pleasant scent still teased my senses. I suddenly found myself at a loss for words and kept sipping my beer to calm my nerves. Before I knew it, Catherine had pressed her shoulder against mine. Our bare arms touched, her warm skin sticking slightly to mine. At the same time, I could feel her chest softly pressing against me. When I glanced at her, Catherine's face, with her half-closed eyes, seemed to radiate a different kind of allure than usual. I figured she must be tipsy and decided to treat her accordingly. I had to, or else the quickening pace of my heartbeat would have been too much to handle. But the words Catherine whispered in my ear snapped me back to reality. "Bear, can I touch your scar?" "Catherine." Without waiting for my response, she reached out with her another hand and gently traced the scar from my forehead. I froze, unable to react. Her soft fingers moved slowly, starting from my forehead, gliding down between my eyebrows, alongside my nose, and finally brushing lightly against the corner of my lips, before tracing the edge of my lower lip. "Please stop." I finally found my voice and rejected her touch. Catherine withdrew her hand and repositioned herself, putting some distance between us. "Sorry, but I've finally found you." Before I could grasp what she meant, Catherine lunged forward and hugged me tightly, almost falling off her chair. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew she wasn't acting out of drunkenness. I stayed still, letting her embrace me until she decided to pull away. I had no idea how much time had passed, but by the time I came to my senses, Catherine had already paid the bill. We began walking slowly toward her apartment, still silent. Then, suddenly, she muttered under her breath. That day, it was a bit brighter since it was in the evening. That day? When I asked, she turned to face me and began speaking with her usual smile. The high school I attended, it was known as a prestigious girls' school. You could tell just by the uniform. I was warned when I first enrolled to be careful, but I didn't really take it seriously.
One evening after supplemental classes, while waiting for my ride, I decided to wander around the area. I was so naive.
A man approached me, and I thought he seemed kind.
Before I knew it,
I was surrounded by a group of men on a dimly lit street.
Catherine let out a deep sigh and looked up at the night sky. I didn't know the area, and there was no one around.
I was so scared I couldn't even scream, just stood there trembling with my eyes squeezed shut. Then, I heard a small chime, followed by a loud thud. I opened my eyes, and one of the men surrounding me had been knocked down, lying on his back, with a boy standing over him. I stopped walking, looking at Catherine in shock. She turned to meet my gaze. He threw them one by one, but then one of them pulled a knife and came toward me.
I couldn't move out of fear,
but the boy shielded me and threw him aside.
When I finally managed to breathe, I tried to thank him,
but his face and feet were covered in blood. After finishing her story, Catherine fell silent, hugging her bag tightly. It was as if she was lost in the memory of that day.
"You're hurt.
What should I do?
A handkerchief won't be enough. I'm gonna get chewed out for this. Hey, can I have this handkerchief?"
Sure,
but you need to get to a hospital." "Nah, it's fine. It's nothing serious. I'll handle the police. You just get going. That uniform of yours, you're from that rich school, right? Hurry up, get out of here."
Catherine held her bag tighter, then grasped my hand and looked straight into my eyes. I couldn't tell my parents what happened or even figure out how to find him. The only clue I had was the small bear charm he had attached to his backpack. And I'd been carrying the guilt of never properly thanking him all this time.
"Catherine, thank you for saving me."
Tears welled up in her eyes, but she smiled as she spoke. When I heard that someone named Beringer with a large scar had joined the company, I couldn't believe it. But when I saw your face,
I knew immediately.
It hurt to think that this scar was because of me. But I also admired how you had earned so much trust in sales despite everything.
I guess that was selfish of me, though. Not at all.
I only really struggled with my scar when I got removed from sales.
And the person who helped me move forward again was you.
I quietly pulled a small pouch from my bag and showed her what was inside.
No way. Catherine stared in disbelief at the handkerchief from that day. I never forgot either.
I always carried this with me, hoping that someday I'd be able to return it to you.
Even though I thought we came from different worlds.
I gently took her hand and placed the handkerchief in it.
"I'm just glad you're okay." Catherine clasped the handkerchief tightly in her hand, tears streaming down her face.
I, too, felt a sense of closure from this unexpected reunion.
I hadn't expected anything more.
But just as if to defy the thought, Catherine wiped her tears and leaned in close to me.
"I've always had something important I wanted to tell him when I met him again."
Her face moved closer, making it harder for me to form any words.
"What is it?"
"I fell in love at first sight."
"Will you go out with me?"
Her confession, whispered from such a close distance that I could feel her breath, erased the promise I had made to myself not to hope for more. I had kept that handkerchief all these years because I could never forget her. I opened my eyes and stared at her face, now so close that we could almost touch.
"I'd been in love with you since that day, too."
Catherine smiled, and before I could fully process it, an overwhelming sensation rushed through my body, and I found myself hugging her tightly.
"Hey, Bear. Good job. That nickname's still embarrassing. I'm here to give an update on the app's progress.
A week had passed since that night, since Catherine and I started dating. I had been handling the interactions with the factory on my own now.
Even though it's already helpful, you're telling me it'll get even better? That's amazing. It's thanks to your cooperation in the trial run.
When I first got demoted and sent out here, I never imagined my life would turn out like this. Now, I felt happier and more fulfilled than ever. But suddenly, a familiar obstacle appeared in my path.
As I returned to the office and opened the door, I heard an unwelcome voice.
This is more of a warehouse than a branch.
Or maybe a cage? It must be tough for you both, having to take in someone like him after his demotion. Mark? Oh, long time no see.
Out here in the sticks, you don't have to worry about that face of yours, do you? And you even cut your hair.
Well, I guess this place suits a monster like you.
As Mark spoke, Catherine stood up, but Kevin gently held her back. It was a familiar scene for me, something I'd dealt with before.
I kept my cool and responded, "Are you here on a sales call?" Ha!
As if I'd come to a dump like this for work.
"I'm here to say hello." Ha!
Mark then pulled out a designer gift bag and handed it to Catherine. We haven't had much time to talk, but it's such an honor to be engaged to the daughter of the company president, Catherine.
Don't you think? Wait, engaged? I haven't heard anything about that. Oh, didn't Mr. Yates tell you? Well, maybe it's something they'll discuss after you return to headquarters. So, what's your preference for the honeymoon? Overseas, perhaps?
I've already been to most places, but a domestic trip might be nice for a change.
Catherine's face turned pale.
It was clear this engagement had been arranged without her consent.
I kept my composure and faced Mark. By the way, Mark, did you drive here? Ha, of course. You think I'd come out here without a car?
There's no parking around here, so I had to walk a bit.
It's the worst. Feigning surprise, I exaggerated my reaction. Oh no. This area is really strict about parking violations. I wonder if your foreign car is okay. What? Why didn't you say something sooner? You're as irritating as ever. My dad's going to kill me.
Caught up in our playful banter, Mark ran off in a panic, forgetting to say goodbye. Of course, he made sure to take the gift he'd brought with him.
It was just like him. Catherine, are you okay? Yes, thank you, Bear. And Kevin too. I've dealt with Mark before. But, this engagement thing, I'll talk to my father about it. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. That evening, I walked Catherine home.
As we said goodbye, she spoke seriously. I will never accept that engagement, Bear.
I promise you that. Yeah. I trust Catherine completely.
But I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark wouldn't just leave things as they were. The next day, Catherine was summoned to the headquarters. I was still uneasy, but all I could manage to say was, "Be careful." In the evening, I received a message from Catherine. "It's over, and I'm heading back now," she said. I was relieved to hear that she was coming back safely, though the matter of the engagement still weighed on my mind. I planned to wait for her. By the time night had fully set in, the streets outside the city center were getting darker, and foot traffic had thinned. Catherine was walking along one of those dimly lit streets, carrying several paper bags in both hands. Probably souvenirs for our office and the factory workers.
The street was dark but close to the parking area. Catherine was walking quickly, trying to get through the area. That's when it happened. A group of masked men blocked her path, and when she turned around, she realized she was already surrounded. She tried to escape, but the narrow street left her cornered against the wall. One of the men pulled out a knife, flashing it threateningly in her direction. "Get off her!" My voice roared through the darkness. "Bear! Stay where you are! You hear me?" I charged at the men, throwing them aside one by one. It seemed they were foreigners. The last man, the one with the knife, turned toward me and braced himself. I looked at him, still laughing, and taunted. "What do you think you're gonna do with that knife? Can you even see my face? Do I look like someone who's scared of a knife like that?" The man hesitated for a moment but then lunged at me. His movements were clumsy and unpracticed, and I quickly knocked the knife from his hand and threw him to the ground. "Honestly, Catherine, are you hurt? Bear! What are you doing here?" I helped her up as she collapsed from relief and explained. "Kevin. He had a bad feeling and told me to check on you." Kevin did. I think he had a hunch about something. As I spoke, I pulled off the mask of the man with the knife. My suspicions were confirmed. As I thought, this guy was the only one who wasn't a foreigner. He reacted when I spoke. "Catherine, call the police." After everything was taken care of, we returned to the office. Unlike before, Catherine's main concern was the souvenirs she had bought. "Weren't you scared?" "Of course I was. Until you showed up, Bear." Seeing her smile shyly made me even more determined to protect her from any future threats. But the next problem wasn't aimed at her, it was aimed at me. Just 2 days later, it happened. I was suddenly summoned to the headquarters. The call came from the HR department. Catherine looked pale, and Kevin let out a groan. It was Kevin who broke the silence. "We might have been set up." "What do you mean?" "There's no reason for Bear to be called in like this." Catherine was in a panic, but Kevin calmly tried to reassure her and then turned to me. "Bear, just go. As your boss, I'll have Catherine go with you. The two of you can handle this." With that, Kevin handed me the keys to the company car. It was the first time I had been to the headquarters since that fateful day. I was led into a large conference room, where some familiar faces and the bosses I'd only ever seen in photos were seated. Catherine glared intensely at Mr. Yates. The meeting was led by the head of HR, Edward. I had to stand and listen as they laid out their accusations. Apparently, I had been loitering around the headquarters out of resentment for my demotion, and in a drunken rage, I had attacked an innocent person, sending them to the hospital. The events of that night had been grossly distorted by the time they reached HR. Just as Edward asked me if the claims were true, Mark interrupted. "Do we even need to hear his side of the story? We have eyewitness testimony from one of our employees who happened to be there." "Isn't that enough?" "It's true, the evidence speaks for itself. There are photos, aren't there? Robert, surrounded by ambulances and police cars. And the employee's testimony. That should be enough," said Oliver, Mark's father and a company director, backing up his son. It was clear that father and son were teaming up to attack me. Edward, under the weight of their authority, seemed ready to side with them. I fought to assert my right to defend myself, and eventually, I was given a chance to speak. I took a deep breath and began carefully. "Yes, that's me in the photos." The room murmured, and Mark and Oliver nodded smugly. I continued scanning the room. That night, I did indeed throw several men. The photo shows me explaining the situation to the paramedics and police that I called. More like an interrogation, Mark jeered. Ignoring him, I pressed on. Did this eyewitness take any video of the incident? Of course not. We don't employ anyone with such poor judgment as to film at a crime scene, Oliver scoffed. I see. I reached into my bag and pulled out something. It was my personal phone. Without saying a word, I began to operate it. As soon as the audio played, the atmosphere in the conference room froze. Who hired you to go after Catherine? There must have been someone behind this. I don't know. We were just gathered online, probably with fake account names. What was the account name? I paused the recording. It was the conversation I had recorded after subduing the man with the knife. This is a recording of the person I'm accused of attacking. And I did some investigating on my own. The real name behind that account is Mark. What? All eyes turned to Mark. But he wasn't going down without a fight. He quickly seized on a weakness in my evidence. So what? That doesn't prove anything. Audio can be faked, and you could have paid anyone to say that. I expected him to latch onto that argument and put my phone away. Although I didn't want to drag her into this, Catherine tugged at my sleeve, her determination clear. She stood up, looking ready to take charge. Edward, may I speak from here on? Yes, do you have something decisive to share? Robert didn't want to involve me, but the truth is, that night, I was surrounded by masked men. One of them had a knife. There was a loud thud as someone suddenly shifted in their seat. It was Mr. Yates. Catherine must not have told them about the incident. Just as Mr. Yates looked like he was about to speak, Catherine shot him a fierce glare. Robert happened to be there by chance, and he saved me. The recording you heard earlier was from the interrogation of the only suspect who could understand English. And here is the evidence to back it up. Catherine held up a tablet. Displayed on the screen was a video of Catherine being surrounded, followed by me throwing the attackers to the ground. Why is there a video? Mark suddenly shouted out in frustration. Oliver's face twisted as if he had just swallowed something bitter. This video was recorded by one of the attacker's friends. Apparently, he had been consulted about this job and, out of curiosity, came to see what was happening. When he saw Robert's judo moves, he was so amazed that he decided to film it. After Robert spoke with the police, the friend approached me and gave me the video. Now, with this video and the audio recording I provided, don't you see the truth behind this incident? Mark. With everyone's eyes on him, Mark slowly stood up. It was clear that his eyes were unfocused. So what? I got rid of an eyesore, and I was going to get the girl I wanted. What's wrong with that? I'm an elite, I can make anything disappear. Isn't that right, Dad? Mark. You fool. I worked so hard to cover this up and get you that engagement. Why do you always have to get rid of anyone you don't like? Oliver looked around, realizing too late that he had spoken out of turn. Mr. Yates. My son is just upset right now, he didn't mean. Oliver, are you saying your outburst was also due to your distress? Ugh. Mr. Yates glanced over at Edward and spoke. It's clear now. The consequences for Mark and Oliver will be determined later. I understand, Edward replied. Mr. Yates then turned to me and Catherine. I'm sorry to ask this of you both, but could you come to my office next? Yes.
I wondered what more could be waiting for us, as a wave of exhaustion washed over me. Together with Catherine, I followed him to the president's office. The secretary had already prepared tea for us. "Please, have a seat." "Thank you." Catherine still glared at Mr. Yates. With a deep sigh, he slumped his shoulders and spoke. "Catherine, can you please stop being so upset? I've already apologized about the engagement. And I'm sorry for getting Robert involved. I'll make sure to deal with Oliver and Mark appropriately." "I trust you, Dad," Catherine said, turning her head away in defiance. Mr. Yates, flustered, looked every bit like a father who couldn't handle his daughter. I couldn't help but chuckle. "Oh, sorry about that." "No, it's fine." "Robert, can you tell me more about yourself? I'm ashamed to admit that I only know what's written on your file and what I've heard from Mark." I hesitated for a moment, but then I caught Catherine's encouraging smile. I decided to speak. My family was a single-parent household. My father practiced judo as a hobby, so I trained at a dojo throughout my school years. My mother says my strong sense of justice comes from my father. I was expected to have a promising future in judo. But one day, on my way back from the dojo, I intervened in a fight involving a drunk man, and I injured my leg. I continued judo, but I could no longer make quick movements. Still, I couldn't stand by and let others get hurt, so I kept stepping in. Seeing Catherine's face darken, I shook my head and smiled at her. I don't regret my leg injury or this scar on my face. But it meant I could no longer pursue a career in judo. And I had a lot of uncertainty about my future. That's when my teacher at school, a great person, suggested I try programming, since I had a knack for science. It was tough at first, but I studied day and night, even collaborating with students from abroad. I decided this was the path I'd take. But when I entered the workforce, I ended up in sales. I won't lie, I felt like all my hard work had gone to waste. But I had confidence that no matter how much my environment changed, I could overcome it. I paused, took a deep breath, and looked directly at Mr. Yates. The transfer was my first real setback. But Catherine was the one who helped me recover. Her constant smiles and encouragement gave me the strength to keep going. She's someone very special to me. Without realizing it, I had blurted out something extra, and I kept my gaze fixed on Mr. Yates. He simply said, "Thank you," and with that, we were dismissed from the headquarters. The next day at work, I couldn't help but notice Catherine and Kevin smiling knowingly at each other. I was still tired from the day before but tried to carry on as usual. Then the intercom buzzed, and I went to answer it. When I saw who the visitor was, I rushed to the door in disbelief. "Sorry for interrupting your work, Mr. President." The unexpected visit from Mr. Yates made me even more nervous than I had been yesterday. But, strangely, I was the only one feeling that way. Both Catherine and Kevin were acting as if it was business as usual. "Oh, Kevin. Sorry I couldn't come by sooner. Turns out you were right all along. Mr. Yates, it's all in the past now. Come on, have a seat," Kevin said, motioning for me to sit down as well. Still stunned by the situation in front of me, Mr. Yates began explaining. "You see, Kevin and I are what you'd call colleagues from the same class. Before I inherited the company, I was just an employee like everyone else. Oliver was, too." His logical approach left little room for doubt. "Kevin, does this mean you had me go check on Catherine because—" "Yeah. I knew Oliver's nature, and his son was just the same.
I figured it was better to be safe than sorry. I never imagined Kevin, who I had seen as a passive type, was so perceptive. I mentally apologized to him for underestimating him. And today, I came here because I have something to discuss with you, Robert. Me? Yes, first, about Oliver and his son. We've asked them to resign. Oliver called me a fool for being a doting parent, but this decision wasn't just because of Catherine. I intend to protect all my employees. Mr. Yates. He nodded and then took on a more solemn expression. And as for what you told me yesterday, that man you saved while injuring your leg, that was me. What? I wasn't sure at first. I couldn't see your face clearly back then. But I remember the bear-shaped charm on your bag. I had no way of finding you. But yesterday, after hearing Catherine's story, I realized it. Both my daughter and I owe you our lives. There are no words to express my gratitude. Thank you. Overwhelmed by the truths being revealed, I could only bow my head in silence. Mr. Yates left quickly, saying he'd invite us to his home soon. I couldn't help but think, as busy as he is, he came all the way here just to share the truth. That's exactly the kind of person Catherine's father is. That evening, I stayed late to finish some final tasks, and Catherine brought me a light meal. We took a break together. Seriously, so much has happened these past few days. Yeah, but you were amazing, Bear, Catherine said, smiling. Please, stop with that. I'm not amazing. But, hey, in anime and comics, aren't there a lot of heroes with scars on their faces? Yeah. I love that character from a ninja with a scar, and samurai stories too. Right? I liked those characters, too. When I first got this scar, I kind of felt like I'd become a hero myself. I was proud of it. But when I realized fantasy and reality are very different, it was a little disappointing. I thought I was just reminiscing, but when I noticed Catherine had gone quiet, I quickly tried to correct myself. I don't mean I'm ashamed of it. I know, but Bear, you just don't understand. Huh? Catherine looked at me with a mix of sadness and frustration. You don't realize just how much of a hero you are. To me, to my dad, to the people at headquarters, to everyone at the factory, and to Kevin. You're everyone's hero. You're the hero I've been waiting for all along. A hero. I see. It was as if a fog had lifted from my mind. And looking at Catherine, who had supported me through it all, nearly in tears, I had something I wanted to say in return. In that case, Catherine, you've always been my hero, too. I moved behind her and gently wrapped my arms around her from behind. She grabbed my hands and buried her face in my arms. Then make me your heroine instead. Ha ha. Hey. 2 weeks later, I was running the final tests on the prototype at the factory. We intentionally triggered errors to see if the system would respond correctly. Bear. The system is picking up even this small discrepancy. Does that mean it's good to go? Yes. Everyone at the factory clapped and cheered with excitement. We were finally moving toward the full commercialization of the project. In fact, as the prototype neared completion, thanks to Catherine and Kevin's efforts in reaching out to other factories, we had already gained a number of new clients. Thinking about the future filled me with excitement. As for Oliver and Mark, they ultimately chose to resign. In such a small industry, rumors spread quickly. Finding new jobs would likely be very difficult for them. Mark, in particular, had relied solely on his father's influence, so his actual sales skills were almost non-existent. What happened to them after that, I didn't know. To be honest, I just hoped they were grateful it didn't escalate into something criminal.
While I was back at the office, taking a short break, Catherine and Kevin returned.
Great job, Bear. Judging by that look, everything went perfectly. We also secured a follow-up meeting for later. Yeah, everyone's excited.
They said their work has gotten much easier, and they can't wait for the full product launch. Feeling happy, I decided to bring up something that had been bothering me since I arrived.
Can I ask, what exactly is this branch? Honestly, I thought I'd been demoted when I was sent here.
But there's no reason to build a branch in the middle of nowhere with no customers. And we've got the company president's daughter and his old colleague here. On top of that, our project got the green light from the company.
It's been puzzling me for a while now.
I clenched my fists and waited for their response.
Catherine and Kevin exchanged glances, and Kevin spoke first. Well, we were planning to tell you eventually.
This branch is actually part of the first phase of a major company reform.
What?
To put it in comic terms, this is like the starting village, Kevin said with a grin.
He continued.
Mr. Yates is pushing for a new reform for the company, but he didn't have the right ideas or the right people to make it happen. So, he decided to build this branch in an isolated area, hoping we'd find a new direction.
The people chosen for this mission were Catherine,
who will eventually lead the company, me, a trusted colleague, and you, someone with both IT knowledge and sales potential, though unproven.
And you've delivered results. So that's why you were connecting with factories that weren't even clients. We were just having fun with it.
With a smile, the two of them returned to their work. My heart was still racing.
A hero, huh? Whoa, Catherine.
I hadn't noticed that it was already past 5 p.m., and Kevin had already gone home. Apparently, I'd spent quite a bit of time lost in thought. Hey, it's just the two of us now, Catherine teased.
Yeah, I guess so.
My dad says you should come to our place this weekend.
By the way, did you ever tell Mr. Yates that we're dating?
I didn't tell him. But I've been telling him how much I like you since the day I met you, Bear.
Maybe he figured it out because I stopped saying it recently. As Catherine laughed, I couldn't help but ask, why did you stop saying it?
She sat down beside me, linking her arm through mine, and looked up at me with those familiar eyes.
She whispered, because I can tell you directly now.
Without thinking, I wrapped my arms around her and pulled her into a tight embrace.
Can you call me Robert instead of Bear from now on?
Robert. I let my hands gently touch her cheek and then traced along the corner of her smile. Please, stay by my side forever.
Looking back on my life, I've taken some detours, but none of it was in vain. I can say it proudly now.
The saying, hard work never betrays you, is true. But only those who have worked hard will ever truly understand that.